Ken, listen to me.
Look out! Oh God! They're pulling two people out of a van.
Who are they, Ken? Who are they?
There's a bunch of them. They're people, but they're crazy. They're pulling these two out of the van. Oh my God! They're fighting them. They're actually carrying them to the ground in their mouths.
Pontypool is one of those obscure little indie flicks I get recommended all the time that relies entirely on the seal of its concept. In the simplest terms, it's technically a zombie movie, but more specifically, it's a story set in one strict isolated setting, a radio station in Pontypool, Ontario, and the execution is more akin to a radio play than a conventional feature film, at least in its first half. It's also arguably a really dark, fringing on subtly absurdist comedy that caught me completely off guard, as it unravels into a somewhat eccentric B-movie that disappointingly abandons the uniqueness of its initial premise. Yeah, out the gate, I can't sing Pontypool's praises as much as I'd like to, because despite a genuinely brilliant, suspensefully engrossing first half that kept me on edge as the exacerbating circumstances slowly came together, I just don't feel it sticks the landing, but we'll get to it. Adapted as both a film and radio play by author Tony Burgess from his 1995 novel Pontypool Changes Everything, and inspired by Orson Welles' 1938 radio adaptation of War of the Worlds, Pontypool tells the story of a washed-up radio DJ called Grant Mezzi, who's regulated to the graveyard shift at a local radio station in the ass end of nowhere. One night, during a particularly spicy snowstorm, Grant, his manager Sydney, and assistant Laurel Ann begin to hear reports of mysterious attacks around Pontypool that eventually lead to military intervention and quarantine, leaving the radio team to piece together the strange happenings from the growing discomfort of the radio station. By the way, I am aware the film is the quality of a potato. This is the only version I was able to get on Amazon, but hey, since it is framed as a radio broadcast of some sorts, as long as you can hear it, I'm technically in the clear on this one. Now granted, given the horror is fiercely reliant on dialogue and phone calls, simply talking about the film isn't really going to do it justice, so I will attempt to show audio clips to help contextualize what makes the first half so effective, but please bear in mind I'm also dealing with YouTube and their forever infuriating copyright system. Before we dive any deeper, this video is sponsored by Vezi. When it comes to footwear, there is no marriage more perfect than style meets practicality, and as I boasted on this channel for many years now, Vezis have become my ultimate go-to footwear for every condition and every occasion. Whether it be walking cheddar in Ireland's typically cold summer, or walking over 30 minutes each blistering hot morning in Austria to compete in the Dodgeball World Championships, Vezis have elevated my urban style with their new courtside classic shoes. These bad boys have been my comfort shoes throughout my entire time in Austria. In fact, I've literally been wearing them courtside when coaching and warming up outside playing shoes because their slip-resistant rubber and non-marking outsole provide excellent traction, and their cushion insole provides light shock absorption for the non-stop moving about. With the constant sweating in a 30+C heat wave, Vezi courtside classics provide remarkable breathability to keep my feet nice and relaxed, and their Dymatex material makes courtside classics scarily waterproof for sudden weather changes, as well as just making them all around easier to clean. The vibrant modern style of courtside classics gives me confidence in whatever I'm wearing, making them perfect for casual walks, social occasions, or getting me through the intensity of coaching multiple matches a day. You can kickstart your city adventures today with Vezi and discover vintage style and modern comfort at vezi.com/ryanhollinger or clicking the QR code on screen to find the perfect blend of style and practicality and enjoy an instant 15% off your first order at checkout. The film begins by introducing us to Grant on his way to the station, only for him to randomly encounter a strange woman who disappears into the dead of night while mimicking everything Grant says to her. It's basically set up to foreshadow the eventual revelations of the virus that causes its victims to go insane, akin to Stephen King's 2006 novel The Cell and the 2007 horror anthology The Signal, fitting the film firmly into that early to mid-2000s era of Technophobia. While I don't want to give too much away just yet, the film film does loosely embed itself into the theme of techno-horror when the virus is revealed to be spread through literal communication, on top of the fact that the film is about characters dealing with the particularities of how we transmit and broadcast our voices in the modern age. I wouldn't go as far as to say the film is an allegory, but it certainly lingers on the theme of the power of words and ideas and the effect it has on each of us, which is something that serves as the initial conflict between Grant and his station manager Sydney. Grant is established as this larger-than-life character out of his element in a low-budget station working with underpaid, overworked staff who want to keep broadcasts sweet and simple to maintain the status quo of a quaint, uneventful little town. Sydney argues with Grant that he should do the bare minimum and avoid provoking listeners with his intense, sensationalist style of broadcasting because it's simply not what their timid locals are used to. As you would expect, what significantly holds your attention and serves as the anchor point for the film is Stephen McHatty's performance as Grant. His crisp, rustic voice has a commanding presence, he's warm, witty, charismatic, but not afraid to push people's buttons if it helps ignite some engagement. He's a man who thrives off attention and drama, showing nothing but disdain towards covering tedious local news reports and weather reporting, instead asking Laurel Ann to keep tabs on the police radio in case a meteor story is to emerge, which of course it does.
Ken, do you see any police? Is anybody trying to restore order?
No, I don't see... Wait. There's a convoy of trucks and military vehicles. Where did they come from? What the hell?
The world building around Grant is excellent. While we never leave the confines of the studio, there's enough richness in the dialogue to build a picture of the town and interpret various aspects of the characters. Nothing is ever directly explained, including the virus itself, but it makes for a more alluring film that evokes the sensibilities Orson Welles' War of the Worlds did. For context, the story behind Orson Welles' October 30th, 1938 broadcast was that because the first act of the play began as a fictional radio broadcast reporting breaking news of an alien invasion, it allegedly caused multiple listeners to misconstrue it as real, creating a mild bit of largely debated hysteria. In the case of Pontypool, while it's obviously not trying to pull off the same effect, although if you listen to the radio version it is technically more effective, it does initially leave you questioning if what is happening is a hoax, given we nor the characters ever see outside to be sure for ourselves. The information they receive is entirely communicated through calls and vague news reports that remain just as uncertain, even bordering on misinformation due to a lack of any real, tangible information from within the quarantine. For example, early on, Grant receives a call from a reporter at the BBC who questions him about the military roadblocks, asking if it has anything to do with separatist terrorist groups, creating a false narrative to stir debate and speculation. Grant even initially shows himself to be a hypocrite before he realizes his own fears by scorning the attempts at fear-mongering about the situation, despite the fact that being provocative and triggering people is his entire selling point. Again, it is tapping into how we perceive what we're communicated with and how we evaluate our means of communication, with a significant portion of our discoveries coming from weather reporter Ken Loney, who gets caught in the middle of a violent riot. It's here where the film hits a frightening crescendo when weather reporter Ken details about numerous injuries and fatalities, with the perpetrators either speaking in deranged, incoherent ways, or making bizarre noises that mimic the things around them, calling back to the lady Grant encountered in the opening. However, before hysteria truly settles in, Sydney does try to de-escalate the tension by trying to bring the broadcast back to its regular lighthearted shtick with a deeply problematic amateur musical production of Lawrence of Arabia.
Fuck you, Rick.
Yeah, it was this jarring juxtaposition that sparked the film's eccentric sense of humor. Like, it's not a comedy by any means, nor does it disrupt the horror, at least not intentionally, but there is this deranged oddball feature where it's as if Grant is the only seemingly sane, rational person in a town of quirky, out-of-touch locals. Hell, there's another jarring moment later in the film when Ken gets infected and Grant tries to console a tearful Sydney, only for her to just outright state that she thought Ken was a pedophile for no reason, and Grant's facial expression is absolutely golden. Anyway, as events intensify, Grant tries speaking to an eyewitness who responds in a manic state described earlier, before eventually reconnecting with Ken, who fearfully reveals he's hiding from attackers in a silo after witnessing disturbing acts of violence, cannibalism, and people basically acting like feral animals.
They're biting. It's just biting. They look like a school of fish, like a frenzy, a piranha. It's almost as if, it's just how it looks, I guess, but it looks like these people are trying to climb or eat their way inside in.
It's easily the film's best scene. Ken's performance sells it more hauntingly than anything we could ever see. However, before long, a French transmission intercepts the airwaves, warning locals not to speak in English, use baby talk, or any terms of endearment, which is solidified when Ken captures audio of a victim supposedly making unnatural crying baby noises before finally dying.
You're about to hear is coming from Mary Galt's big teenage boy. He's lying here in the dark with his body, it's broken to pieces, and his wrists, I can see them, they're stumps, they're not stumps, they're pointing up at his sides.
That's why calling it a zombie movie doesn't really do it justice, because it's ultimately building towards an infection that's transmitted by words. I swear to God. Director Bruce McDonald has been quoted as saying that the infected are better described as conversationalists as opposed to zombies, given that the infected simply repeat words and sounds they hear around them, whilst viciously attacking their victims. We see this when Grant eventually tries to leave the studio and they're attacked by a group of infected, repeating Sydney's pleas to Grant not to leave the station, which is arguably more frightening than had they just been traditional moaning zombies. It's as if the characters are being antagonized by their own words and haunted by constant deafening, overwhelming sound, with the only solace being the soundproof booth that Grant and Sydney eventually hide in when Laurel Ann becomes infected, mimicking the whistle of a boiling kettle. They're met with the help of the eccentric Dr. Mendez, who arbitrarily arrives just in time to explain his theory as to what's going on and what he calls the God bug. Basically, certain words have become infected and it spreads when the contaminated words are spoken, but the trigger isn't the sound but rather our understanding of the word itself. In other words, if you know what the infected word means, you'll likely become infected, and the infected then seek other victims to pass it on to before offing themselves. The irony of all of this is that we communicate with words, so how can they warn others of the threat without indirectly spreading said threat, leaving them to question how to approach the situation? It does take a bit of time to wrap your head around it, but it is a pretty genius concept I wished was explored further, because the last 30 minutes just don't do much with this very idea. In the case of Laurel Ann, she's unable to hear them within the booth and thus loses their scent, so to speak, causing her to eat her own lower lip and vomit blood before dying because she's unable to find a victim to sustain herself. In a way, it adds this bizarre, tragic layer to the virus where the victims are basically trying to stay alive by spreading the virus. The infected soon break into the station while Mendez gets infected himself, only for him to overcome it by speaking another language, causing Sydney and Grant to start speaking in French for the same reason. They end up killing an infected child while fleeing for their lives, leading to a meddling scene surrounding guilt after Mendez sacrifices himself to lure the infected away. It's just a very tedious climax where not much happens the moment they leave the radio booth. I understand it's trying to create some bit of dramatic action, but I think it's a dull substitute for the great writing up to that point. Eventually, Grant finds a way to disinfect words by changing their meanings, so when Sydney starts getting triggered by the word kill, he's able to switch it to kiss, thus she's cured, I guess? It's a bizarrely humorous paradox to defeat the virus by essentially coaching people to stop understanding what's being said, but it's underdeveloped as a resolution that it feels more contrived than it ought to. It's a concept I think works better on paper than it does on screen. If you don't understand the word, it defeats its purpose, thus the infection has no real power, so Grant decides to go back to the radio to change the meaning of infected words because suddenly he knows them all for some reason. I mean, you can definitely make it fit an allegory about our relationship with language and meaning, but regardless of how you take it, the film then ends with the insinuation that the town is nuked, only for a post-credit scene stylized like Sin City for some reason, where Sydney and Grant change their identities because maybe the infection worsened to the point we now have to change our perception of everything we know? Honestly, I just don't know what to make of it. I didn't like it. I actually did listen to the radio play version, and I think I prefer the ending to it because it's basically a subtly compressed version of the film where they adjust the final act to fit the audio format. In it, Sydney actually dies in the end and Grant becomes infected with the word paper, only to end with the hopeful insinuation that he's able to overcome it by changing the word paper to trap. And that is Pontypool. I didn't love it, but I appreciate the creativity, and I'm always open to hearing more requests like this, so keep sending them my way. I do recommend the video game Killer Frequency if you want a game version of the concept, albeit it's about a serial killer, so do check that out if you get a chance, and until next time, stay safe, stay away from the English language, and I'll